Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Finholm recording a lesson for Math 7 at Red Wing High School. This is the first video lesson of concept number 9. Concept number 9 for Math 7, and this lesson comes out of our student workbooks, lesson 1-7, which begins on page 45 in our workbook. If you don't have your student workbook and a writing utensil out, please get one out now so that you can take these notes and follow along as we go. Now that we have our materials out and our books open to page 45 in our student workbooks, let's get through some math together. So the first half of concept 9 is multiplying rational numbers. So by the end of this lesson, we want to be able to confidently say, I can multiply rational numbers. Rational numbers could be written as a decimal, or we could turn them into fractions. Just like our concept number 8 learning goal, we need to have our numbers in the same form or format in order to multiply them and make sure that we're not making any mistakes. So that might mean that for some of our numbers, we have to work with improper fractions. A reminder that you should be writing these notes down along with me, and you can pause the video at any point. All right, so let's do a quick review example from 6th grade. Okay. There are two review components that we need to remember from 6th grade. The first component is remembering how to turn a mixed number into an improper fraction. And to do that, you might remember the phrase round the horn. Round the horn means we start in our denominator, we multiply 4 times 2, and then we add that answer to the numerator. We go around the fraction. And so 4 times 2 is 8. 8 plus 3 is 11/4. Okay, so that's one thing we're going to review and use from our 6th grade learning standards, is being able to turn a mixed number into an improper fraction. And the second is remembering how to multiply two fractions. And so if I had, let's just say 5/12 times 6/9. There are two methods we can use to solve this fraction. We could multiply our numerators, multiply our denominators, and then simplify. Or some of us might recognize that 6 and 12 are common, and they are both divisible by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1, and 12 divided by 6 is 2. So you can simplify first. I think maybe in 6th grade your teachers might have referred to it as cross simplify. Once we've simplified as much as we can, then we multiply our numerators. 5 times 1 is 5. And multiply our denominators. 2 times 9 is 18. Okay, so just a quick practice problem for you to try. Copy this on to page 45 in your workbook and give it a try. If I asked you to multiply, let's say 7/30 times 10/15. Pause the video and give that a try and see, and make sure you remember that skill from your 6th grade lesson. All right, now that you've tried that skill and remembered that concept skill from 6th grade, we're going to move on to page 46 in our workbook. Okay. You can always pause and read through these examples, and remember there's always that option to go to the online textbook and see and hear the video or the interactive animation. Read through these guided example problems for you. Lots of resources to help you with math. Okay. And so we see an example there of Petra and Ben doing some climbs up and down a mountain. And you can see that we can think of it on a number line visually, or as multiplication. So let's try one together. Megan's bank account is charged $9.95 per month for an online newspaper subscription. How could you represent the change in her account after 3 months of charges? And so I have 3 groups of negative $9.95. A charge is a negative amount. So we could think about it as jumping on a number line. Now you'll notice on their number line, they get these numbers very, very close to 30, but it's not actually right on 30. But I do know from my number line that because each of these numbers is really close to 10, my answer should be close to negative 30. Okay. And we could also think of it as a math expression. If I have 3 times negative 995. We can do that. We know it's going to be close to negative 30, and we know my answer is going to be negative because all of the charges. We could either get out a calculator or we could do some multiplication using some prior knowledge. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 9 is 27, plus 1 is 28. 3 times 9 is 27, 28, 29. And so sure enough, her charges are really close to negative 30. So we know from our number line that we're in the right track and we can probably trust our answer. And the change in her account balance will have dropped by $29.85. Okay. All right, let's look at some examples on page 47. So we've seen some review of concepts from 6th grade, and we've looked at a review of how to multiply decimals using either old school multiplication or using our calculator to help us along the way. Now let's review those products of fractions when something's in fraction form. Okay, so again, you can see in your workbook on page 47 is the page we're on. You can see 2 examples worked out that you can always read through. You can see these generalization rules reminding us of our sign rules. Okay. And now we're going to look down here and do some of these try it problems on the bottom of page 47 in our workbook. So the first 2 that we look at here, letter A, because they're both in decimal form already, we can put those in our calculator and let technology help us solve to get those answers. Make sure you remember to put in your negative signs when appropriate. We know in letter A that a negative times a negative becomes a positive. So your answer when you put it in your calculator should give you a positive answer. And in letter C, a positive times a negative stays negative. So when you do that answer in your calculator, you should get a negative result. Let's look at letter B together because not all calculators have a fraction button. And so it's still really important that we know how to multiply fractions. So in order to multiply 3/5 times 4 and 1/6, first we have to go around the horn. We need to make both of these into fractions. So 6 times 4 is 24, plus 1 is 25/6. Okay. Now we're going to multiply these 2 fractions. But just like our other review problem on the first page of this lesson, I recognize that 3 and 6 are both divisible by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, 6 divided by 3 is 2. And I recognize that 5 and 25 can both be divided by 5. So 25 divided by 5 is 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. Now when I multiply across, I still have that negative that's going to come along. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 2 is 2. Negative 5 divided by 2, we could either divide in our calculator to turn it back into a decimal, or we could use our trick and look at how many wholes can I pull out. Well, 4 divided by 2 is 2, so I can pull out 2 wholes and be left with 1/2 left over. Oops, kind of ran out of room on my screen there. So the answer to letter B is going to be negative 2 1/2. Okay. Let's look at letter D as well. In letter D, I'm going to turn negative 2.5 into negative 2.5. And I'm going to multiply that by negative 7/10. Now, one thing I notice right off the bat, I notice that a negative times a negative will become positive. So I know my answer is going to be positive. Now let's set up those fractions and do that multiplication. So I also know that 2.5 is the same as 5/2. I'm using some prior knowledge from a previous example, and I'm turning 2.5 into 5/2. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And 7/10 is my second fraction. We know that a negative times a negative becomes a positive. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And now we can multiply 1 times 7 and 2 times 2. Let's see, 2 times 3 is 6, and 7 minus 6 is 1. And if we just double check that going around the horn, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. And so we know that our final answer in example D is 3 1/2. All right, let's turn to that key concepts page. I just want to write down a couple of reminders for you so that you have them there before you get to your practice video or your homework assessment tonight. Okay. So I'm now in your student workbooks on page 48. Okay. And notice here, they ask us in number 4 to practice that number line method. And so if I'm going in 3 groups of negative 1/2, I'm going to the left 1/2, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. And so we see that we should land at negative 4.5, but let's just double check that. Let's just double check that. And let's look at how we could multiply this out. 3 can still be written as a fraction. 3 over 1 is the same as 3. And if I think about 1.5, 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3, and so I have 3/2. Okay, 3/2. When I multiply, there's nothing that can cross simplify here. So 3 times 3 is 9. And 9 divided by 2 is 4.5, which sure enough, negative 4.5 is right there where I landed on my number line. So of course we need to remember that that negative sign carries. A positive times a negative equals a negative answer. I have one more second here to do number 5 on page 48. Which of these products will be positive? A negative times a positive is a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. One of each becomes negative. A negative times 0 becomes 0, and remember 0 is neither negative nor positive. And here the last example, a negative times a negative is a positive. So you can look through and you can remember those sign rules. A positive times a positive equals a positive. A negative times a negative equals a positive. And a positive times a negative becomes negative in my answer. Those were reviewed in one of our introduction concepts our first week together. If you don't remember those sign rules, you'll want to make sure to write them down again and commit them to memory. All right. I hope this helped.